Okay. Everybody, welcome to the first Managing the Planet session of the semester. My name is Gene Kelly. I'm one of the assistant directors over at the School of Global Environmental Sustainability. I'm also a professor in the Soil Science Department, Soil and Crop Sciences, and I have several other things that I do. But anyway, what I'm here to do tonight is to host our first panel. And for those of you that have not been to a panel before, participated in a panel, we introduce the experts up on the stage. We allow them to provide a perspective about the topic, and then we open it up for people in the audience to ask any question they want. We like civilized conversations. You're allowed to plug anything you want to plug. If you get up, you have the guts to get up and ask a question, you can plug anything you want. Okay, so you have the mic, and then I'll just grab it out of your hands if I think you're being inappropriate. So anyway, but the other thing is that if you haven't been engaged with the School of Global Environmental Sustainability, it's our 10th anniversary this year. So let's give it a round of hands for the school. 10 years. Unbelievable. Diana, you should stand up. That's our director back there. Stand up. 10 years is quite a bit of work by Dr. Let's give her a hand. Thank you, Diana. So I'll make some announcements about a lot of activities. The spring semester is off to a great start, and then we'll get going on our topic for this evening. I'll try to make it around the room as much as possible, and so just flag me down if you'd like to sort of participate and ask a question. So first and foremost, on February 8th, from 7 to 9 p.m. in the Laurie Student Center, the Food Evolution film screening and panel will happen, and that'll be exploring the controversies surrounding GMOs and food. So that'll be a movie and then a panel discussion with some experts from CSU. Again, at 7 to 9 p.m. at the Laurie Student Center Theater. If you haven't been there before, it's a great venue. February 12th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. here at Avogadro's Number, Environmental Justice, Making a Living on a Living Planet with Michael Leon Guerrero, Executive Director of the Labor Network for Sustainability and the Roddenberry Fellow. So that'll be here at Avogadro's Number, February 12th, 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. On February 28th at 6 p.m. at the Laurie Student Center in the Grand Ballroom, Gina McCarty, the former head of the Environmental Protection Agency for the Obama administration. There'll be free admission, but I think there are tickets required. So you have to pick up. Where do we get the tickets? Do we have those? Do we give them out the door or something like that? Okay, we get. Okay, so we'll have a way to monitor the amount of people moving in and out of there. Okay, so tonight our topic. It's very good crowd. Must be really important, I guess. It is. I'm just teasing. Wolf, friend or foe? How will their reintroduction into Colorado impact the environment, economy, and culture? So, just by that title, I can see we're going to have a sort of very invigorating discussion tonight. First and foremost, my colleague Phil Cafaro is the professor of philosophy at CSU and affiliate faculty at SOGIS. His research centers on environmental ethics, population and consumption issues, and the preservation of wild nature. Cafaro is the author of Thoreau's Living Ethics, Walden and the Pursuit of Virtue, and How Many is Too Many, the progressive argument for reducing immigration in the United States. He and a Swedish ecologist, Frank Gottmark, recently embarked on a project to study the environmental effects of overpopulation and the best policies to reduce the future global population growth. Phil, welcome aboard. Next, my colleague Dana Hoag, a professor in the Department of Soil and Resource Economics. He's interested in how to analyze and make decisions about issues where agriculture and the environment collide. This includes the cross-section of research fields such as policy, production economics, resource economics, and regional economics. Current and recent projects include the use of conservation easements, elk and bison management in Yellowstone National Park, ground and surface water contamination, manure management, invasive species, and the economic returns to research, gender, risk, and sex, semen, and dairy cattle. Decision, and that should have a comma in there, the decision analysis with multiple objectives and sustainability. He developed an award-winning risk research and education program for the risk management and has worked with colleagues in the States, federal agencies throughout the United States, both in South Africa, Bolivia, and in Australia. Welcome aboard, Dana. Next, we have Dr. Valerie Johnson, is a DMV Fellow in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology and Pathology. Her work is in investigating the antimicrobial properties of activated mesenchymal stem cells and how they introduce bacteria-killing enhanced antibiotic activity in the treatment of chronic infections. She is currently conducting clinical trials in activated MSC. Welcome aboard. And finally, my buddy Rick Knight recently retired from CSU, a professor emeritus yet, or what do we, okay. Rick is, I knew he wouldn't leave, so that was sort of good. So Rick is a professor of wildlife conservation at CSU. He received his graduate degrees from University of Washington and University of Wisconsin. Before becoming an academic, he worked in the Washington Department of Game developing non-game wildlife programs. Rick is interested in land uses in the American West and their ecological, economic, and cultural perspectives. He believes in the conservation science should be an active participant in all three dimensions. Presently, he sits on a number of boards, including the Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust, the Cafaro Coalition, the Science Board of the Malapai Borderlands Project, the Diablo Trust, the Nature Conservancy's Colorado Council. He is on the board of editors for both conservation biology and ecological applications. He's a contributing editor to the Working Ranch magazine. Rick was selected by ESA as the first cohort of Aldo Leopold Fellowships, which focus on leadership, scientific communication, and with the media. In 2007, he was honored by Colorado State University with the Board of Governors Excellence Award in Teaching. He's a 5-time recipient of the Student's Choice for Outstanding Faculty, and he's a member of the College of the Warner College of Natural Resources. Wow, what a group. Anyway, so why don't we turn it over, each of you, a brief opening remark, providing some context. And so, Phil, you want to kick it off? Yeah.
Sure, thanks, Gene. And thank you all for being here tonight to talk about this very important topic. Before I forget, since we are allowed to give plugs, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to give a plug. The CSU student chapter of the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project has just gotten started, and we're going to be having a meeting tomorrow, 5 p.m., in Eddy Hall, room 5 on campus. If you're a student especially, and if you're interested in wolf reintroduction in Colorado, hook up with the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project and the CSU chapter here. So human beings have a long history with wolves. Curious wolves probably started hanging out around human encampments 25,000 years ago or more, taking those first halting steps towards domestication. In the New World, Native Americans typically respected wolves as powerful and effective hunters, and sometimes even revered them. And they expressed these appreciative attitudes in stories, in art, in wolf warrior societies, in Plains Indian tribes, and in respectful taboos surrounding the hunting of wolves. More recently, settlers in North America imported European prejudices against wolves as bloodthirsty and cruel killers of good animals and as impediments to progress, defined in narrowly economic terms. And I just want to share with you two quick quotes which I think express this pretty well. The first one is from a scientific book, D.F. Robinson's Natural History of Quadrupeds from 1828, so almost 200 years ago. This is a direct quote. Wolves are such ferocious and useless creatures that all other animals detest them. Yea, they even hate each other, and therefore scarcely ever live together, each one in its own separate whole. The continual agitations of this restless animal renders him so furious that he frequently ends his life in madness. Jumping ahead almost 100 years from then, here's a quote from North American. This is Ben Corbin in Corbin's Advice, or The Wolf Hunter's Guide, published in 1900. Corbin said, "I cannot believe that Providence intended that these rich lands, broad, well-watered and fertile, and waving with abundant pasturage, should forever be monopolized by wild beasts and savage men. I believe in the survival of the fittest, and hence I have fit for it all my life. The wolf is the enemy of civilization, and I want to exterminate him." And he got his wish. In 1945, the last wolf in Colorado wandered into a trap in the San Juan Mountains. Well, we know a lot more about wolves today than we did 100 or 200 years ago, and most Americans at least have outgrown these prejudices against wolves. Yet on the ground, progress lags. Wolves remain absent from most of their former range in the United States, including throughout Colorado, while our wildlife management practices remain mired in a failed paradigm of lethal control of bad or expendable animals to benefit good ones. Wolf reintroduction is a great opportunity to move our state in a different direction. Just as previous generations of conservationists first imagined and then created national parks and designated wilderness areas, efforts that need to continue. So we today have an opportunity to restore the West's missing apex predator and move the wheel of environmental progress forward. Here in Colorado, we have an opportunity to create communities that fairly share the economic burdens that wolf reintroduction may bring, while sharing the landscape fairly with other species. And as we think about wolf reintroductions, we do so against a background of humanity's massive ongoing global displacement of other species, the start of a mass extinction event, according to many conservation biologists. And I think it's exciting that here in the West, we have an opportunity to move in a more hopeful direction. So instead of destruction, restoration, instead of displacement, reintroduction, instead of taming the landscape further, rewilding it, making it healthier and more whole. This is really a great opportunity. It's a great chance to write a new and improved chapter in our history of wolves and with wild nature more generally, and I think we should take it.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Dana.
Do I need this microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's the first time that's ever happened. Well, first of all, I want to apologize for that long introduction. The Good Folks Soldiers took it off my website, and that's just got everything to appeal to everybody. So the simpler version of who I am is I'm an ag and resource economist, and I specialize in policies that deal with farmers in conflict, things like groundwater. I've done work with prairie dogs and so forth. So that's really where I'm coming from on here. And with regards to wolves, I don't have a lot of experience, so I'm really going to focus on how ranchers feel when they hear the words reintroduce wolves. That's the main thing I'm going to do. I've talked to Farm Bureau and some others and asked them how they feel. I thought I knew, but I wanted to make sure. So I'll try to represent their views. I encourage you too that I'll start with the term reintroduction is a little bit confusing even because Colorado does have what's commonly known as a wolf management plan, and I encourage you to go look at it on the Parks and Wildlife website. And it involves natural colonization of wolves working their ways into Colorado more slowly. So anyway, they do have an official plan that's been worked on with a panel of people. And then there are people who want to reintroduce them, which is a different thing, and it has implications for the Endangered Species Act. So I encourage you to read up on that a little bit. So secondly, I guess I want to just make a couple of points to start off with. The first one is that I believe that any natural resource has to be balanced. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of animals, there's a lot of plants, and all of us are competing. And I think the balance question is slightly different than it was, or maybe a lot different than it was when we reintroduced wolves in Yellowstone. In that case, wolves were more endangered than they are today, and we reintroduced them into a place that is less crowded than Colorado. So it's a very different situation. So I think as we seek to think about reintroducing them in Colorado, we have to think about balance. And I should say, too, I don't have a stake in this. I'm not real strong. I don't have strong feelings whether wolves should or shouldn't be introduced. The second thing I'd like to say, so balance is the first thing, slightly different. The second thing is maybe go a little slower because there is going to be a lot of conflict. There's not as much habitat here. There's going to be more people, more cows, more sheep. So maybe introducing a little more slowly is a good idea. And the last thing I'll say is, since I'm representing ranchers, and farmers, they own a lot of the land that this is going to occur on. And one of the comments, just to give you a little bit how ranchers feel, is they say, I raise cows for people, I don't want to raise cows for wolves. If I'm going to start raising cows for wolves, then pay me. So they're afraid. And so one of the things I'd like to encourage is involve anybody that's going to be affected. That's always the best idea, and I think everybody here would agree. There's a really good example of that. I think it's in Montana. It's called the Blackfoot Challenge. You can look them up on the website. In that case, they reduced a lot of conflicts by introducing rangers, and then they removed carcasses and put them in composting. So involve ranchers is the third point I'll say. I've got a lot of facts and figures from a master's student who did a paper with me a while ago, and I also did a study on the cost of agriculture to coexist with wildlife in Colorado. You're welcome to come get these afterwards. I can give you all kinds of facts and figures. But let me just say this one about farmers and ranchers. Hyperbole is really important, and the way you state something is important. We don't want to under or overstate something. When you say to a rancher, oh, it's just one cow, we'll pay you. Okay? Here's what they hear. Well, first of all, if I was going to sell it, I would have sold it already. It's not worth just the market price. Okay? It's worth more to me than that. So they don't like to hear that. Secondly, they believe that a lot of times the burden of proof is really high on them and they're never really going to get paid. Okay? There's all kinds of stories. It only takes once for somebody not to pay for everybody to believe nobody's going to pay me. So what they believe is you're introducing another predator, it's just one more headache, and they're afraid. So I guess just kind of help them out and make them understand that you understand that. That would be the last point.
Okay, great. Valerie?
Hi, thank you. I want to thank you all for having me here, and you're probably wondering from my bio why I'm here. So I do stem cell research at Colorado State University. I'm a veterinarian. I also work in the small animal critical care unit, but in addition to that, I work part-time for the wolf sanctuary and part-time for the wild animal sanctuary as their staff veterinarians and providing veterinary care to wolves and many, many other wild animals, all of whom ended up in our care because people think lions and wolves make great pets, which I will first of all tell you they do not. Wolves are not dogs. And when they asked me to speak on this panel, I thought, I don't really know anything about this question. However, we recently went through a bit of a interesting question with regards to moving the wolf sanctuary, and where it was going to go was near a ranch. And so because of that, I did quite a bit of research on cow-wolf interactions and how cows react to the presence of wolves, and talked to a lot of behaviorists, and I think that that's why I'm here. However, to look at this question, I felt like I had to do a whole lot more research, which I think I have done, but I too have questions for these other people who are really the experts. But in the beginning, when they asked me, I thought, oh, they think I'm going to come in and go save the wolves, which I am. However, as people have said, there's a whole lot more that goes into this question. Do I love wolves? Yes, of course. Do I want there to be an all-out war between ranchers and wolves getting shot and cows getting killed and people losing their livelihood? Absolutely not. And so I think there's a lot more that goes into it than I like wolves, you know. So I did do a bunch of research. A lot of it, I think, it's interesting because Yellowstone has already gone through this process, but Yellowstone is quite a bit different from where we're proposing introducing the wolves. So anyway, I'm really glad you asked me, because it forced me to really look at this question and how do wildlife and people coexist? Like, that in my mind is the bottom line that we're always trying to figure out. And, you know, my solution of killing off half the people doesn't meet with a very good response most of the time. So I'm going to have to figure out a different way.
Yeah, that might work with this crowd. So
okay, great. So in any case, that's my area of expertise. I hope I can contribute something. Thank you.
Great. Rick, finish it up.
Thanks, Valerie. If I'm turned on here. So I guess I'll begin briefly with what I think about wolves coming into Colorado. And when I thought of that, immediately a Leopold quote came to mind. And Leopold was writing, this was way back in the 1930s, and he was talking about the complete extirpation of grizzly bears in the lower 48. The only place in North America where they still occurred, I believe there may have been one or two in the Mexican Sierra Madre, but they were up in Alaska and across Canada. And Leopold wrote, relegating grizzlies to Alaska is like relegating happiness to heaven. I may not get there. So it probably wouldn't take the most clever mind to understand that I'm in favor of wolves in Colorado. But I'd like to reiterate what both Valerie and Dana said. Wildlife conservation has been effective. I mean, it's probably been 2 steps forward and a step backward since Aldo Leopold, in a sense, created game management, which morphed into wildlife management. But it could have been a lot more effective if it would have incorporated the human and the economic dimensions with the ecological dimension. And that's what it's been reluctant to do. And so I would, I think, double down on what Valerie and Dana said, that either if they come here on their own or we have a state ballot initiative that passes, I hope we give them, and I don't want to say a warmer welcome because they had actually an extremely hot welcome in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, and are still receiving that. But I hope we give them a more informed welcome. Thanks.
Okay, great. Well, all right, somebody, let's get going. First question, here we go.
I got it.
Okay.
I'm a criminal defense attorney. I'm an American Indian. But I really wonder why you don't even focus on the basis of why we have the changes to begin with. Wolves are just a component of what's going on. The fact is that our country, right, we disregard our natural resources. If we begin from that basis, suddenly wolves are just a component of our discussion. So, I understand it's not so much about scientific, it's philosophy. I'm drunk. No, I am. I've been here for a while. You know, but I am. But it is philosophical. And in my opinion, I'll stop 1 minute, is like this. We need to have balance. So where's our balance? I understand ranchers, I understand oil, all that. But where's our peace? So.
Somebody want to handle that question? Yeah, Rick. Yeah.
I can say something. Listening to him speak, he was brief, but F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote that the sign of a truly remarkable mind is the ability to handle two seemingly contradictory thoughts at the same time. And I think he has one of those sort of minds. Hold on. My former students are in the audience. So this idea of bringing wolves back, you know, on one hand, it seems like we have these polarized camps, you know, and we're very comfortable now talking about tribes, the red, blue, rural, urban America. I think to get wolf reintroduction right in Colorado, we're going to have those extraordinary minds because we're going to have to think of these seemingly contradictory ideas. And I think that's what he was sort of drifting toward.
Okay. Anybody else? Dana?
Just add one thing. When two things seem really conflicting, a lot of times when you have enough public discussion, enough scientific input, you can reduce those conflicts. And there are really creative ways. So I think if you start by saying we don't want them, we do want them, there's a middle ground, but that's going to require creative ideas, like this Blackfoot challenge I was mentioning.
Right.
And so there are lots of good ideas out there, and there's, of course, plenty more to be had. So hopefully that what you're asking for, more balance, will happen with more discussion and more inclusion.
Okay. Question?
Okay, so my question is not very philosophical, very nitty-gritty, and I'll wait till the train goes by to ask it. That's what I love about this place, a lot of local color, right? Yes. Anyway, my question deals more with bringing the farmers and ranchers into this and making sure that they feel like they've been heard. I was in a conversation with some sheep growers, ranchers, a few years ago, and they were talking about predators more generally, but they seem to not think that the occasional sheep, lamb, whatever, that went down to a mountain lion or a bear, they were thinking bears also were important, was the big issue for them. They were sort of, yeah, they're here, they can take one every once in a while. But their real problem was with what they perceived to be the weight loss and failure to gain associated with being, I don't know, disturbed, worried, whatever, and that caused them a lot more grief. And I'm wondering if that's something that's generally accepted in the community of researchers and people who favor wolf reintroduction, if they're interested in, if we're going to compensate farmers and ranchers, it's not about the occasional sheep that gets killed. It's what else is going on in this system that we want to create some balance in. So I'll end there.
Okay. Valerie. Yeah.
I'm going to prove my usefulness now.
Please.
So this is something that the ranchers brought up with the introduction of the wolf sanctuary, and so it's a question that I've talked to a lot of people about and done a lot of research on. And indeed, you are correct in that wolves are not, or rather cows are not innately afraid of wolves. If they've never been attacked by a wolf or a coyote or a mountain lion, you can parade wolves in front of them all day long. They don't care. We literally have cows at the wolf sanctuary that come up to the fence line, lie down right next to it, nurse their calves. They don't care. They've never been attacked by wolves. However, in the areas where wolves have been reintroduced, wolves that have predated on cows, there are consequences in those cow herds, in that if they sense a predator around, they become scared. Cows that become scared then change their behavior. They can experience with, chronic predation, a decrease in reproduction, injuries, that sort of thing. So that is definitely a true statement, and that is definitely a concern. And in my mind, as you say, far outweighs the occasional cow that, I'm a vegetarian, but it was going to be hamburger anyway. Hamburger for the wolf, hamburger for you, whatever. But I've been told that's not the way I should think of this, because there are other things to think of, and that is one of the other things. So that is absolutely true. And one of the things that we were talking about maybe planning this better is they've done a lot of research about the ranches that have been predated on. They've made models, which ones are most likely to be predated on, and those models have been very predictive. They also have done a lot of education, and this is post-cow attack, on how farmers can prevent it, how we can stop that from even happening. And so I feel like in order for this to be a successful venture, that would have to be part of the program. We don't want the herds being scared to the point where they're not reproducing, they're aborting calves, and that is actually a very real thing in wolves that are, or cows that are chronically predated on. So, so I think that would absolutely have to be part of the plan, is how are we not going to compensate not that they shouldn't be compensated, but not necessarily just how are we going to compensate these farmers, but how are we going to prevent this from happening? Because that is definitely a very real thing.
Okay, and Dana.
I totally agree, and farmers and ranchers will tell you these things all the time, all these extra things, but I want to put some numbers out there really quick for you. Not a lot, don't worry. In 2008, the student I worked with came up with all these numbers, and I couldn't dig them all up again, so I'm going to have to use older numbers. But in Wyoming, 16 sheep were predated on wolves in 2008 in Wyoming. 900 by bears, 13,000 by coyotes. So when you start looking at the numbers, wolves do predate, but they're very small compared to these other species. Also, if you look at total numbers for the 3 states, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, there were about 200 cows and about 350 sheep, and about 260 wolves that had to be killed. Okay? So that's about 1/3 of the wolf pack at that time, and that's about 4% of cows. So the numbers are small, but they seem large. And this issue of telling people the numbers, if we seem preachy and tell farmers, hey, it's just a small number compared to everything else, it will come off wrong. But slowly, if they realize that it's smaller than some of these other species they've already been dealing with a lot, there's some room to be gained. But you have to be careful how you do that, not to sound preachy.
Okay, question back here.
Can I add one more thing real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Valerie. Yeah.
That's great. I absolutely agree. But the other thing that I'd like to point out is one other thing that they found in Yellowstone was that the number of coyotes decreased by 30% when they added the wolves. So you're always going to be dealing with some sort of predator. You want a coyote, you want a wolf, who knows? I don't know which is better. But in any case, there's always going to be something there. It's just a matter of what it is. And they found really effective ways of dealing with that. So yeah, again, I think it's just a matter of education.
Okay, question back here.
So thanks for everyone for, so my name is Zach Weller, and I want to thank the panelists for giving their time this evening. I'm a hunter, and so Rick had mentioned involving everyone in this, and so there's another sort of skin in the game here, right? And unlike most hunters, I would guess most hunters, I would actually be in favor of a wolf reintroduction, but conditional on management plans, right? So all wildlife in the U.S., right, is managed in a public trust. And I want to use the Great Lakes wolf reintroduction as an example, and in particular, actually, my home state of Minnesota, where wolves were reintroduced under a management plan. Population objectives were met, and then the wolves were delisted, but then relisted again thanks to a federal lawsuit filed by some special interest groups. And so now Minnesota does not have state management or state control of that population. And so my question is, what are the things that we can do to ensure that the management plan that Colorado has is that we stick to that plan, it doesn't become a moving target, and then that the management plan is implemented and stays in control at the state level?
Well, the most important thing we could do is to, as we go forward with reintroduction, put in place management plans that lead to thriving wolf populations without, I mean, some of the mistakes people have made in places like Wyoming is trying to go for a sort of small number and say anything above 400, anything above 500 wolves, and immediately that's a failure, and we have to start knocking them back. And so then you get environmental groups arguing on the other side that there's plenty more habitat, plenty more prey, and I think the key to keeping state control of a management plan would be all the stakeholders in the state agreeing on that plan. I mean, they're not going to agree on everything all the time, but if we can work together, when that fails, then of course one side or the other goes to court, and that's when you lose control of it.
Anybody else? Dana, yeah.
So my policy side, I did call and check on some of these things, and if a wolf is in Wyoming right now, it can be shot as a varmint, just on site. Okay? If it crosses into Colorado, the Endangered Species Act, it's a federally protected animal. If Colorado passes a referendum, I'm told that they have to be careful, because then you got the federal government with the Endangered Species Act. There's a lot of complicated issues here. And of course, the will of the people over time will overcome those, but it won't be easy. So okay. Hunting wolves, for example, is a big, it's harder than it sounds, and it requires a lot of policy implementation too.
Okay, great. Here we have a question here.
So I'm Shelley Coldar. I'm the executive director of the Wolf Sanctuary, which Val mentioned. So a few years back, the governors of Hickenlooper, he unfortunately, and also from New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah, signed a letter together that says they will not participate in a reintroduction program. That is very disappointing. And studies have shown that without a reintroduction program, wolves will not be able to repopulate this area for a very long time, if at all. So we need to be able to have a reintroduction program. So how do we get around this when our own governor has said no? And then after you guys answer, I have a plug. Okay. Oh, the plug is, you guys will probably be interested in this. We're having our gala on April 21st, and Rick McIntyre, who has been watching the wolves in Yellowstone for the past 20 years, is going to come and talk at our gala. And if you'd like to know more about it, let me know. This is a rare opportunity. He has not left Yellowstone for 20 years. He's not been on a plane in 20 years. And it took some convincing for us to get him to come here. So this is a great opportunity for you guys to meet him and find out his 20 years of working with the wolves one-on-one.
So what was the question? I forgot the question.
How to get around the governors.
I can say a word, but Holmes Ralston is also waiting to ask a question. But I mean, it sounds like most of us here would I mean, how wolves get here. Most of us would rather see them welcomed in a sustainable fashion. And as Phil alluded to, in the state of Wyoming, in resisting the federal government and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, it's really been a tumultuous tenure. And time will tell if it's going to be a viable population. So what we literally have to do is to do something right now America is struggling with to its very core. And because of the presidential election we've just all experienced a year ago, the media is finally talking about, it's not red-blue states, it's red-blue counties. And if you look at the counties that vote red, they're rural, and if you look at the counties that vote blue, they're metropolitan counties. So we have this rural-urban divide. There's scores of attempts right now across the American West. I helped start one with Ed Marston and Dan Kemmis and a few others 15 years ago, called the Radical Center, where we use food and open space to help build bridges between rural and urban America, the red-blue tribal America that now mainstream media is so infatuated with covering. And it's the hardest work in the world. You go so much slower to try to build consensus, particularly when we've already dug the trenches so deep now between rural and urban America and the American West. It's going to be hard. I mean, what we like to say in collaborative conservation is you have to go slow in order to go fast. But if you have the patience, if people are willing to actually sort of step out of the red-blue trenches and meet in the middle. Sorry. The results are longer lasting, but it is hard. And I mean, we all live at the southern edge of a very successful collaborative conservation effort that took place, the Mountains to Plains project. The first 11 years of that, we had accomplished nothing except for endless meetings. 11 years without a single accomplishment. And then look at it, it finally blew up, and now we have over 100,000 acres of private lands that are conserved, connecting the Pawnee grasslands to the Roosevelt Forest, to the Canyon Lake District. So that's the way to go, but it's almost un-American. But incidentally, that's our only hope for America as well, if we're going to become a stronger country instead of a deeply polarized country.
All right. Okay.
Gene, could I just follow up on
no,
one
that's
point?
fine. Yeah, no, go.
What was your name again?
Shelley.
Shelley, one point that Shelley made that's kind of important to emphasize. When you talk to some experts about this, like David Meach and Barry Noon talks about this in his talk, it seems unlikely that we're going to be able to reestablish wolves in the state of Colorado simply naturally by them wandering down from Wyoming or wandering up from the Arizona-New Mexico border. At the same time, if you look at habitat maps of the western U.S., the largest and best unoccupied wolf habitat in the western U.S. is the western half of Colorado. So it's a tremendous opportunity. It's probably not going to happen unless we actively work to make it happen.
Okay, Dana.
Speaking from a policy standpoint and the ugly side, I think everybody sees now policy's a game. You know, and I teach a policy class. We talk about this all the time. What would speed this conversation along is a referendum. I don't think you could write a referendum that could be implemented right away. I think there's too many issues. But if you did a referendum, you would force the state's hand to have to deal with this. If you think about the state's perspective, they probably have a lot of good reasons not to want and get involved in this. There's a lot of legal issues and challenges and people mad. But that's the fastest way to get this discussion moving along, in my opinion. It's an ugly way, but it's the fastest.
Okay, Holmes.
Well, you finally began to answer her question, but Phil, you can answer it even better. Where is that Ted Turner business to get toward a public referendum on the issue? Then, after you answer, I still have a question.
Okay. Hang on to the mic.
Well, the Ted Turner folks have helped set up the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project, and they've been doing studies about attitudes towards wolves in Colorado. They've been feeling different groups out. They've been trying to initiate discussions about wolf reintroduction in Colorado. They haven't formally committed yet to running the referendum, but they've been talking about it.
Well, I thought they were working toward getting a public referendum on a ballot. Are they not doing that?
There's been a lot of talk and a lot of work towards that. It's not an official thing yet.
Okay, thanks. My question is, we had mention of Wisconsin. Who can comment on the ranchers, farmers and wolves in Michigan and Wisconsin, how they get along with each other?
Okay.
I've never asked a question.
No, what?
I've never looked.
Okay. Didn't you go to school in Wisconsin, Rick? Yeah, it was on your resume.
You know what? We didn't have black bears. We didn't have wolves in those days.
Ah.
We're both there now.
Okay.
Gene, I lived in Minnesota for a while.
Okay,
so
well,
I
you're,
can
that's
speak
close.
A little
Go ahead.
bit about that.
Sort of.
So in Minnesota, there's a thriving wolf population, and there's some tension with farmers in especially in the northern part of the state where most of the wolves are. I can't speak to what's happening there right now, but again, having some state control and being able to limit wolf numbers in certain parts of the state, I think has mostly led to peace. I mean, at least compared to the arguments and all the wolf shootings in Wyoming and Idaho, it always sounded like in Minnesota there was just more acceptance of having wolves and less conflict.
Have wolves move farther south faster than they anticipated?
That's true. Wolves have moved farther south faster than they anticipated in Minnesota, and that led to conflict because, of course, some people looked at that and said, well, it's wonderful that wolves are recolonizing more of the state, and now maybe I'll get to see them down in my part of the state. Other people said, no, wolves only belong in the northern third of Minnesota. So that success, as sometimes happens, led to conflict.
Rick?
Well, let me say something quickly on this string we're talking about right now about a possible ballot initiative in Colorado. I don't think we want to close the door for natural recolonization. For those of you who are following what's going on the Pacific Rim, amazingly, you know, they made their way into the state of Washington, and there's over a dozen packs. And now they've established packs in the state of Oregon, and wonder of wonders, there's at least one pack, and I don't know if we have an update, there's at least one pack now in the northern part of California. We did, I'll tell you a really quick story. I took all my graduate students up to the Red Desert, which a lot of people concede the Red Desert and I-80 are the major barriers to get wolves into Colorado. And if you've ever spent any time in the Red Desert, but I took them up there before the gas and oil drilling hit that part of the world, and we all wanted to see it the way it had been. And we came one day on a couple of wolf tracks, and that was amazing. We had a Wyoming game warden visit our camp the next morning and have breakfast with us. And I said, what's going on? Were those wolf tracks or just guard dogs from a band of range sheep, of domestic sheep? And he said, no, there's a couple of juvenile wolves trying to just out exploring, you know, for a walkabout, and if they can survive the Red Desert with its lean diet for wolf-type creatures and survive I-80, they might make it into Colorado. And I think we all know wolves have made it into Colorado in the past. Some people say they're wolves present now. They haven't done well, you know, they haven't had that right sort of chemistry of male and female in time. But I don't think we should close the door on the fact that they might be able to do that. Gene, I have to tell you this.
Sure.
I mean, say this story, because this always cracks me up. When talking to rural audiences across the American West, sooner or later somebody's going to ask you, so what do you think about wolves? And I get on my high horse and I say, well, I'm pissed. Excuse me. I'm upset. What is going on in this country? Michigan, the home of Detroit, has wolves. Whatever happened to John Wayne, Louis L'Amour in the state of Colorado? Aren't we the rugged individualists? But now we're saying that we aren't good enough for them.
Right.
And all those blue voting, latte sipping, Starbucks addicted coffee people on the blue Pacific Rim. I'm just kidding. They all have wolves too.
Yeah.
And the pet tiger.
And the pet tiger.
I hadn't heard about that.
Okay, we had a question over here.
Hello, my name is Griselda. I'm a student at CSU studying wildlife biology. Hello, Rick.
Hi.
So my question is, I remember last year I went to the Wolf Symposium. It was right before the Wildlife Society meeting here. And something that really stood out to me was one of the scientists, I can't recall if they were from Idaho or Wyoming, mentioned, so there's this big myth behind wolves being it's a very Western myth, I believe, at least from my experience, that they're very scary and attack a lot. But what he discovered in various instances was that when a rancher would report that their cattle had been attacked by a wolf, after further investigation, they discovered that the cattle had already died because of something else, and then the wolves had come to eat the cattle that was already dead. So how can we move forward in trying to like kind of move away from that Western idea and myth that wolves are a lot scarier than they really are, and kind of see the whole ecological impact that they have? Because prior to like colonialization and Europeans coming here, there was, you know, a big impact and role that they played in the ecology. And how can we move without patronizing, you know, ranchers, because that's their livelihood? How can we move towards, you know, that ecological view of why they're so important?
Great question. Go ahead, Valerie.
Hey, yeah. So I'll get this one, although I have a little input from Dana first. So the problem that you mentioned about the wolves predating on the carcasses, that is part of the Blackfoot project that he had mentioned. Part of what they do is go around and pick up carcasses so that they're not there for the wolves to come and predate on, and that kind of avoids some of that conflict. But I did want to talk about, although I don't have personal experience with it, having never lived in any of those states, I did read a lot about the conflicts in those states between ranchers and wolves in trying to kind of figure out this question. And they've done a whole bunch of studies looking at wolf predation of cows and the farmers' perceptions of that, and discovered, you know, a lot of things. And one of the things that they found is that when wolves were delisted and the farmers were able to shoot them, that it actually made the problem worse, because wolves would just go on to the next farm who would then shoot them, and then we'd end up with a whole lot more dead wolves and a whole lot more predated upon cows than if they had kind of just stayed with that one herd, which obviously is not ideal either. But when they went and educated the farmers and told them how to not let this happen, then all along the board, the number of cows being killed decreased, the number of wolves being killed decreased. And so again, I feel like it's a matter of, one, you know, kind of looking at what's been done before. Okay, the wolves are going to come predate on these carcasses. We need to make sure that they're removed. We need to educate the ranchers on this is what you're likely to expect, and here's how to prevent things. So, so once again, it's a matter of people coming together and communicating what we've already learned from places where it's already been done, and then that's the best that we can do, and then deal with things as they come, I think. Anyone else have something to add?
Okay, Dana, you have a comment?
No, that's perfect, but I would say, as an economist, cost is always an issue with any government program. But I want to say this, there are so many volunteers that would be willing to act as rangers and things like that. There's a great program in Colorado with the plover, which is a bird that likes open space, and they were talking about not letting farmers plow the fields. It caused this big problem. But anyway, a bunch of, I'm just going to call them bird enthusiasts, agreed to go out and scout the fields and find the plover, and they marked the field, and then the farmers drive around it. It was a super easy solution. So this is one of the few cases where you could probably find enough volunteers to do some scouting to help keep the wolves away and the carcasses and things like that.
Okay, question over here.
Yeah, I was in Idaho when they reintroduced wolves there in the Frank Church Wilderness area. And there was a sign up, and it had a kind of to-scale drawing of a coyote and a to-scale drawing of a wolf. And it said, "Hunters, identify your target." And somebody had taken a red magic marker and drawn crosshairs over the wolf. And it made me kind of wonder about, you know, other conflicts. We focus mostly on wildlife, but I'm thinking about outfitters, maybe other people, river outfitters that use the backcountry, who might also have concerns about the reintroduction of wolves. And then also conflicts even within the agencies themselves. In essence, the same agency that reintroduces the wolves is also the agency that promotes hunting and is financed through hunting fees. So I was wondering about any comments about other conflicts rather than just agricultural.
I have a thought on that. In listening to you talk, it reminds me right now there's a generalization that's starting to emerge because of some things taking place up in Idaho and Wyoming and Montana, that elk hunters as a generic class, are anti-wolf. And if you read High Country News and sort of follow these bylines of what's going on, yeah, they're starting to generalize all elk hunters as being against wolves. We've done the same thing, of course, and for probably probable cause, I should have said, for ranchers, that ranchers are anti-wolves. Well, there's a progressive element in the ranching community and in the hunting community, and those are the people, when you're working in the radical center, you're not gonna, it's just like when you're trying to build bridges between rural and urban America, you're not gonna go for the zealots, right? You're gonna go for the people that have the time and the consideration to talk. As a good example, as we speak, the CSU chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, which I'm the faculty advisor, is meeting tonight over in, I think, the Wagar building. And Backcountry Hunters and Anglers are a progressive element of the hunting community. I hope I'm not offending anybody here who hunts and fishes. And there's, as Gene said, I'm on the board of the Colorado Cattlemen Agricultural Land Trust. We were our state cattlemen's organization was the first in the western states to form a statewide land trust. And it's now actually the largest land trust in Colorado with conservation easements. And since then, we have 8 other western states in which, including Texas and Kansas, including that the state cattlemen's have formed land trusts, and Nebraska and South Dakota are queuing up, so we'll soon have 11 states. So there are these progressive elements in every group. And I know when we talk about hunters maybe being anti-wolf because of their love of hunting elk, or ranchers being anti-wolf because their economies are based directly on livestock, I think all of us realize we're not painting all elk hunters and all ranchers in those sort of categories.
I wanted to say one more thing about that economic question, and this is definitely not my area of expertise, but in some of the statistics that I was reading about Yellowstone, they had categorized the amount of money that was lost due to loss of elk hunting, wolf predation of livestock, and also the amount of money that they expected to make from wolf tourism. And it was in the order of $1.5 million lost and $24 million gained. And now I don't know where those statistics come from. They're published in a scientific journal, so I'm certainly not the expert on that, but it does seem like, at least in Yellowstone, it was an economically lucrative proposition.
And that's worth re-emphasizing. I mean, there have been numerous studies looking at the economics of wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone, and they've all kind of come to that conclusion, at least the ones that I've seen.
Dana.
Just real quickly, you asked about other conflicts. I stated earlier you need to involve the people that are going to be affected, and hunters are affected, and these are examples. Hunting in Wyoming maybe is excessive, maybe it isn't, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, some controlled hunting may be the best idea. It also raises revenue. So I guess that needs to be all talked out. I'm not going to express an opinion here. But another thing that can happen is urban. You know, you hear all the time, wolves don't kill people, they don't. Actually, in 2006, there have been about 100 cases of wolf and people interactions that not very many were deadly, but there were quite a few that were, maybe a dog was killed or a person was afraid. It only takes one of those to scare a lot of people. And so there could be urban, you know, you asked about other conflicts. I'm just going to throw that one on the table. Is you might get sort of like coyotes in California and mountain lions and things like that. People start getting scared. And so those are other potential things we have to worry about.
Okay, question here.
Hi. Probably demonstrating some of my kind of like lack of knowledge on this subject, but from Colorado's perspective, whether that be environmental or the people of Colorado, like what are the benefits of introducing or allowing wolves to come to the state? Or also, what are some of the drawbacks?
Okay. Phil?
Well, you know, from my perspective, the great benefit has to do with what wolves are. I mean, they're beautiful, complex animals. When I think back to my great wildlife viewing experiences, a number of them involve wolves. Now it sounds kind of like a very subjective, squishy thing, but behind those tens of millions of more dollars annually in tourism in Yellowstone is the fact that people just react in a visceral way to wolves. It's very exciting and beautiful to watch wolves. You also want to think a little bit about the role that they've played over millennia on the Great Plains and in the mountains, and the fact that they've been here year after year and they've been successful. And the question of whether there's just not something missing if wolves aren't on the landscape. I don't know if that resonates with people in the audience or not, but to me, it does. I mean, a lot of people are living in the state of Colorado because we love wild nature. I mean, raise your hand if you left New York to come here. Raise your hand if you left California, crowded California, to come here. You left Texas to come here. I mean, there are a lot of overdeveloped places in this world, and in Colorado we still have the opportunity to enjoy and experience wild nature. And for many of us, that's the best thing about living here. And bringing the wolf back would be a part of preserving and extending what makes Colorado so wonderful for us.
Okay. I have a question over here, back here first. Here we go.
My name is Bob Hare, and my question is, where would the wolves expect to do the best in the western part of the state? Can I assume any release would be west of the Continental Divide?
That's what everybody that I've talked to about it has talked about, yes.
And what counties or regions would they be expected to do the best, to thrive?
Around Meeker, right?
Yeah, I mean, in general,
Northwestern Colorado.
You're saying northwestern? I mean, in general, if you look at the maps, I've seen a few maps that have tried to dope out the quality of wolf habitat in the western part of the state. And in general, they're the wilder parts of the state that are less developed.
The other big issue in Colorado is elk populations and deer and food. So it's on top of that is food. And wolves have been shown to make elk populations healthier, and the things that elk eat healthier too. But that could draw them into places we don't want them, like Rocky Mountain National Park, where there'd be a lot of human conflict. So that's one of the issues I think needs to be talked about is, can you just put a wolf in an area and say, this is your little boundary, stay here? So it's going to be a little tricky.
Okay. Well, I think we already know that we won't be able to do that. And if you have wolves in western Colorado, they're going to be in Rocky Mountain National Park. I'm not willing to agree that we don't want them in there. I think I want them in there. I want to see them in there.
Well, maybe.
Okay, go ahead, Val.
I just wanted to interject one thing on the question that gentleman said, and just in addition to what you guys have said. So in Yellowstone, they too had an elk overpopulation problem, as we do in Colorado, and that's one of the reasons the wolves were introduced. And so not only did they decrease the population and make the elk population healthier, but in addition, many of the plants that the elks had overeaten started to grow again, which made the whole ecosystem much healthier. And so, so for me, that would also be one of the benefits. And the downsides are exactly this: wolves interfacing with humans where they're not wanted. And that is the crux of the whole thing, I think.
Okay, we have a question back here, and I'll be up in front in a second.
Hello. My question's regarding cattle ranchers. It sounds like a lot of predators are still attacking without wolves. It seems to me that introducing or ranching a North American bison, an animal that knows how to fight off the predators that are already here, they could do a better job than cows. I just wonder, on the cattle rancher side, how they feel about ranching bison versus cow.
You know, this is why I love people talking and providing input and coming from different backgrounds. I never would have thought of that. But that's a possible solution, and that's why you involve ranchers, and maybe somebody's already thinking about doing that, and this would be the impetus to do it. But I've never seen a study like that. I know obviously you've seen wolves take down bison in Yellowstone, so I know they do take them down. But anyway, I don't know if your premise is even right, but if it is, that's the kind of solution we need to look for.
Researchable.
It is.
Okay, we have a question over here, and I'll be up in the front in a second.
Thanks. Hi, my name's Beverly, and I'm actually an interpretive ranger in Yellowstone National Park in the summer. And so I spend my time talking to kids and adults about how they're good for the environment and all of those things. And I know all of us here love wolves, and people come from India and Japan and China, and they are in love with the wolves in Yellowstone. What I would like to know is how you mentioned about the red and the blue, and instead of one or the other working together. What do we tell people, all of us in here that love these wolves, when we leave and we talk to the person on the other side of the fence? What do we say to them, and where do we point them so that they can become advocates for the diversity that the wolf brings to the environment?
Let me give a short response, Gene. I think we don't say anything. I think we ask questions. I think there's probably enough talking, giving advice to people. We probably need to be listening a little bit more.
Follow up. Okay, question.
On the benefits score, I'm a member of the Colorado Division of Wildlife Animal Use and Care Committee. When that comes up in that bunch, they say, well, yes, we could have reintroduced wolves. But the amount of money it would take to reintroduce wolves, listen, could much better be spent benefiting other forms of wildlife that people are more likely to see and enjoy. If you kind of want the biggest bang for your buck in wildlife viewing, stay away from the wolves. How are you going to answer that?
Step up, Phil.
I've never heard that argument made before. So you're saying that the people on that committee have made that argument to you?
Well, you hear that argument on that committee.
No.
This is the Colorado Division of Wildlife, and they're thinking about their programs, duties, and how they ought to be behaving.
Yeah, I mean, I'm skeptical. I'd like to see some figures on that, and I'm so.
Better birds. You like birds.
I love birds. Yeah, there's that Harris's hawk up by the interstate there that's been there recently. But knowing a little bit about some of the figures coming out of Yellowstone about how many more visitors are coming to see the wolves. I mean, I'd be awfully surprised if you could get.
It doesn't work, they say, in Colorado.
So let me throw some numbers out there, because Farm Bureau did complain about this when I talked to them, and so they were complaining about the Mexican gray wolf. If you don't know this, they're a much more southern species, and they're more endangered. They're harder to get introduced, evidently. But anyway, they're spending $35 million a year in New Mexico alone. So as an economist, though, if you ask everybody in America, and we'll take the urbanites that really aren't exposed to wolves, what would you pay to know wolves are here? It's a big number, much bigger than 35 million. And that's how you justify wolves. We know that their value to society is higher. The problem is the costs are on one person and the benefits are on another. That's the issue. So policy, again, my political side would say this. You want people to give targeted dollars. So the Wildlife Division can't, if they're dollars donated for wolves, then they can't use that argument. Okay? If they're dollars donated for wildlife, then they get to choose, and they're going to choose what they want. So one of the ways, like wolf advocates to get this done, is to get dollars donated for wolves.
Okay. Question here.
Just a couple of quick ones. In terms of CSU, I guess it'd be for Mr. Knight. are there any kind of plans for programs for students to maybe learn how to go out into the field and do some sort of non-lethal coexistence strategies in these areas where the wolves will be reintroduced potentially, like similar to brewing programs, et cetera, at CSU, in terms of creating jobs for people in areas where they might be economically depressed? And the second question is, are we thinking about Mexican wolves being reintroduced? Are we thinking about northern gray wolves? And because of the genetic difficulties that the Mexican wolves are experiencing in New Mexico and Arizona, are we concerned about, or what are we looking at there? Is it, what type of wolves are we talking about reintroducing?
I don't know, but technically Colorado, and maybe it's the southern part of the state, is in the Mexican gray wolf historic range, but I think they've been more or less talking about the, what's the correct common name anymore, the Rocky Mountain? Yeah, so it's a toss-up. I mean, I don't know. In terms of what the Warner College of Natural Resources might be able to offer, I mean, truth be told, the wildlife biologists have the skill set now, and they're actively engaged in doing this in the state of Montana, where they try to have at least one individual in each pack that has a transmitter. And so, you know, because of that importance of the pack staying together, so they have some idea of where the packs are. If they're starting to approach like a private land rancher and he or she have their cow herd out there calving or something like that, that's always an opportunity to use the human dimensions based on those ecological skills to go in there and then have this range rider program that Dana was talking about. So those things are kind of like the typical skill set of somebody coming out of the Warner College of Natural Resources. And human dimensions, we have a Master's of Tourism Management. We have a certificate, a graduate certificate of adventure tourism. We have all these things that actually are trying to capitalize on this biophilic attachment people have to nature. So they would be more than an able partner to work with the state and the feds on doing something like that.
I did ask the Wildlife Division about the wolf, so I'll tell you what they say, which I'm only saying what they say. But it was I-70 north was the northern gray wolf and I-70 south was the Mexican. They've now moved that down all the way to I-40, which is through New Mexico. And the current thinking is the Mexican wolf habitat, even though it could have been in southern Colorado, really that wasn't prime. They're talking now very southern border, the southern edges of the states below us. So that's the new current thinking.
Those of us that grew up in the rural areas for some time were taught from childhood the different kinds of behaviors that you would expect from wild animals, so that we were never particularly afraid of them. We just knew what to expect from them. My question is do we have any data now that is showing any changes in the behavior of these animals as they're being reintroduced or introduced into a habitat that is more feeling more pressure from the human forces around it? Are we seeing the animals change their behaviors? For instance, where I live, we are looking at mountain lions that consistently come up on porches and take, you know, pet dogs and animals right off the porch. And when we grew up, it was, don't worry about mountain lions, you know, unless you plan to look like some kind of wounded rabbit or something.
Yeah, and we're having coyotes attacking children in Denver, too. The behavior of wildlife of vertebrates is very malleable. That's the one thing we used to sort of teach our students, that they were all genetically hardwired. There's an enormous amount of learning. And truth be told, for animals like wolves and mountain lion, the best thing they can, and with the exception of national parks, the very best thing that wildlife can have is a fear of humans, because we're not all loving creatures, and a lot of us are armed and angry, and we might be anxious to take a shot. When I worked for the Washington Department of Game, it's now the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Back in the old days when I worked for a state game department, while I was there, we took the mountain lion, which had been what you would call a vermin and had a price on its head, $50 for every mountain lion set of ears that people would turn in, and made it a game species. And at the time, I couldn't understand that, being born and raised on Ernest Thompson Seton and all those other books that anthropomorphize wildlife. I just thought, well, that's so unfair. We need to protect mountain lions. But I've since come to realize the best thing you can do, and this may not be palatable to many of you, but the best thing you can do for wildlife, in addition to encouraging a healthy fear and aversion to humans, is actually make them a state game species. Well, maybe the best thing is a protected species. But the thing that we were able to do when we took the mountain lion off from being a pest species, that maybe it was Dana that said up in the state of Wyoming right now, wolves are completely unprotected. The best thing you can do, you make them a game species, because then you can actually control the season and the bag limit and gender and age and things like that. And then we hope, we're an imperfect species, but all striving to hopefully manage a sustainable harvest of that particular species. I think we're comfortable thinking along those lines for maybe rabbits and elk, but we're doing that on mountain lions, and I'm not sure what the status of the mountain lion is statewide, and I don't think Division of Parks and Wildlife knows for sure either, but I do think it's a step in the right direction. Short of having it a completely protected species. The problem when you protect it entirely, you literally have to have a value shift in a lot of people that just their values don't align. They still have that dominion over nature value.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
So-
I would question whether that's the best we can do. It might be the best we can do now. It's certainly better to have mountain lions as game species than classified as vermin. We might be able to do better than that. We might be able to do better than that in 30 years. I just want to add one thing, because I agreed mostly with what people just said on the question. Just want to point out, regarding concerns about people and wolves or other predators, it's important to remember that wolves live in close proximity to large numbers of people in many parts of the world. And people seem to be able to make that work. There are wolves in Italy, there are wolves in Spain. I think by now there are wolves actually in most countries in Europe, including in pretty close proximity to cities. Not that there aren't problems with that, but it seems like there are problems that could be worked out if you like wolves.
Okay, question back here.
My name is Hope. I'm a senior natural resource management major. But I kind of wanted to get back to the conversations on the other side of the fence. And as Rick said, listening is obviously really important, as well as speaking to the same values and having conversations speaking that same language. So what values do you think, pro-wolf people need to speak to when having these conversations, so that it's not my opinion versus your opinion, but actually becomes a cohesive conversation?
That's the sort of question that gets to the heart of this. What we need, and it's not part of our educational system in conservation work, is we need to develop this sense of empathy for people who have different values than we do. Right now, Americans, we're all taking the easy way out of this. We're just, as I said earlier, we're just digging our trenches deeper. Your values are different from mine, so I don't like you. And we're going to be in the opposite side of the fence and never take the time to listen. So I actually, in the capstone course in the Human Dimensions course, which I'm just retired from, Gene, but I would actually give lectures on empathy. And I can guarantee you 14 years of college in wildlife in the Southeast and the Midwest and in the Pacific Northwest, I never heard a professor say anything about empathy.
Oh, okay. 14 years for your undergraduate degree? Oh, sorry, just kidding, Rick.
Hey, knock it off.
Oh, sorry.
Hello. My question is, it deals with the fact that in town here, I have run across a lot of foxes. In one case, I saw the local cat had outed the fox, and the fox was looking over its shoulder as the cat was chasing it down the street. not very fast. But the point I wanted to make is, in town, and walking in Albuquerque, I've run into a coyote. I've seen a fair number of those, but wolves, of course, I haven't seen. But now they hunt differently, all three of those species, and I guess the wolves can take on much bigger game than the other ones, and that's one of the differences here. So how do they hunt?
Well, humans aren't that tasty, first of all, so otherwise they get hunted much more by wolves.
I wonder how she knows that.
Well, you know, those 50% of people I was going to kill, you got to do something with them.
Oh, okay.
Just saying, a giant barbecue. So wolves are, so they hunt in packs. They go after big game. They go usually for the easiest one, which is either an old sick one or a young one that they can separate off from the herd. So the only time really that wolves have attacked humans to eat them is when they're really, really hungry, starving wolves. For the most part, there's way too much noise and commotion and other people around. They're gonna go, you know, for like the easy big game, and they definitely have their favorites. And humans have not been reported to be among those. Looking at, and I looked at the number of wolf kills, both in North America and kind of all over the world, that have been reported in the last 200 years, and there's surprisingly few of them. The vast majority of them are when people have tried to domesticate the wolves, or not necessarily domesticate them, but have encouraged them to be around their surroundings. So they leave food out for them. They say, nice puppy. They think they have this relationship with the wolf, and then all of a sudden, they're alone. The wolf opportunistically will go in, or maybe not even meaning to, I don't know. But that's when the wolf attacks occurs. So it's not, humans are certainly not a natural prey species for the wolf, but if they're really hungry and you're right there licking tasty, certainly they would go after you, but it is so uncommon that I would say it is probably the least of our problems.
Okay, question over here.
My name is Sophia. My question is, I mean, we've touched on a lot of human dynamics, but just like behavior within the packs and how that can impact their behavior to people. Like, for instance, I was just reading an article where they were saying high predation on livestock was caused a lot of times when wolves were indiscriminately killed, and it kind of broke down the hierarchy of the pack. So I'm wondering if, when we're doing like these management plans, how are we going to put behavior and pack hierarchical information in that, so that we don't just harvest wolves that are important to the pack?
That's kind of what I was talking about before when they found the increased predation. Actually, when they started killing the wolves, that's one of the points that that was made, is that it was because now they had no leadership. Now they had to take the really easy prey. Now they had to do what they were used to and things like that. And I don't know. I'm not necessarily a wolf expert. You'll have to go to the Wolf Gala to find out more about behavior. However, I do know, and it's an entirely different species with a different sort of interaction, but I work with someone who was involved in the project reintroducing leopards in Africa, and they had the same sort of concerns, that the people who were growing animals for food were worried that the leopards were then going to come predate on the animals, and it was the main obstacle to the reintroduction of these leopards. And so what they did was they collared the leopards, and they would monitor these, and when they got too close to a human habitation, they would do something to divert them. And they worked with the farmers so that everyone was kind of all on the same page about it, and it worked really well. Now, in wolf packs, as we were talking about, we're not going to collar all the animals, but if you have one animal collared and it's, you know, the pack leader, or then you can monitor their movement, monitor the whole pack's movement, and hopefully, first of all, avoid some of those things, and know when the pack is disrupted. So it does, I think, require some effort on the part of humans to keep track of these animals.
Okay, question in the front. Holmes, go ahead.
In the current lingo, is it wolf reintroduction in Colorado a wicked problem?
Well, I think the definition of a wicked problem is one with many parts, and to some degree you've got a number of contradictions in moving in one direction or the other direction. I mean, it's certainly a very complex issue with a lot of stakeholders. Certainly any changes we made introducing wolves would entrain new issues to deal with. I don't know. I don't think of it as a wicked problem. I think of it as a wicked cool opportunity. I mean, again, it makes sense that we've been talking about all these potential issues and problems. That has to be part, as people have said, that's part of doing it right, is thinking about these and discussing them. But I'd like to just bring us back to the possibility that, after persecuting this animal out of existence, we have the opportunity to bring it back. We have the opportunity to share the landscape with this animal without driving anybody out of business, without not being able to eat food. We can do it. It's exciting.
Well, a wicked problem, as you say, is complex, and it has no possible solution beyond certain chaos and uncertainties. You have to muddle through it, but it's urgent. It gets worse if you wait. And so the best you can do is sort of make do and mend and revisit it every year or two. You can't do better than that with it.
Right, and that's, I mean, people have talked about climate change as being a wicked problem in that sense. Because if you ignore it, it's not going to go away. It's just going to get worse. I think wolf reintroduction is a little bit different. You can ignore it. I mean, the Colorado Division of Wildlife has been ignoring it for 40 years and putting it off. And Governor Hickenlooper, as someone said, signed a memo putting it off. And then the problem just goes away, and we go about our lives. And so I don't think it's a wicked problem in that sense. But on the other hand, I do think it's a wonderful opportunity.
Questions? I have a question, actually. There is a question in here. Okay, so if you believe people, Colorado does everything right, right? We got the marijuana thing figured out. Everybody's calling us about that. We sort of got the fracking thing done, right? I mean, that's sort of, we have the stringent laws and all that. How do we move ahead with this issue, right? What's the absolute wrong thing to do, and what's sort of the right thing to do as we move ahead? So if you could all just maybe give it could be your opinion, but how are we going to drop the ball on this, or how do we move it ahead, and how do we become a model for whatever you want to call it, reintroduction or having wolves back in our ecosystems? Let's say that Colorado is going to set the standard now, right? So are there states that we ignore? So give me your impression. Maybe Rick start off with that, or Phil, whoever, I don't care. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I would say the thing we would do wrong is simply just to drop the ball and expect nature to take its course and have the wolves come back. I think that's most likely not going to happen, from what I understand from the wolf experts. I don't know. I mean, if you think about the models, the people who've done it the best, I tend to think of Minnesota, where, at least when I was living there 20 years ago, there seemed to be a good, I mean, again, people argued and fought sometimes, but there seemed to be a good balance in making policy of listening to the interests of the urban folks and listening to the interests of the farmers who were concerned about too many wolves, and being able to come together on policy. And year in and year out, there were pretty robust populations of wolves in the northern third of the state. So I would call that a success, and I would hope that we could model that here in Colorado.
Okay, Rick?
I was just thinking about that the other day, because you're right. Colorado is neither red nor blue. It's a purple state. So I think we will, whether they come back on their own and are greeted like they're being done in Washington, Oregon, and California, or whether we introduce them ourselves, I think Colorado will do something different. And if we didn't, you know, bad on us, because that means we learn nothing about Idaho and Wyoming and Montana. So, and I'm really hoping that it'll be where we try to find that sweet spot with the economic dimensions, the livelihoods, the human dimensions, you know, the rural-urban nature of any Western state, and the environmental dimension.
Okay, Val, any comment?
Sure. So to echo what Phil said, I think that the only wrong thing we can do is stop talking about it and stop trying to proceed forward. I think that we have so much information, and I mean, trying to look into this question, there were publication after publication, there's story after story, there's statistics after statistics, so that I feel like there is so much that we can learn from the people who have already done it, that we can indeed make it the best interaction for humans and for wolves that has been done yet. If we examine what has already happened, good and bad, then I think there's no reason that it wouldn't be the best, just like everything else in Colorado.
Right. Were there any failures, though, in anything you saw in the literature in terms of the introduction?
Oh, there
Say
was
just wolves. I mean, other species, of course, but wolves, and real failures that were sort of jump out at you.
I mean, there have been so many failures of introductions of animals, but usually it's failures of putting animals where they don't natively belong. And that's not really the case here. However, they have been gone for a while. And I would say the biggest failures that I saw was in the interactions with the wolves and the livestock ranchers. I think that could have been done it was very reactionary. Oh, this happened, now we're going to do this. Whereas we have the ability to be proactive. We know that this happened there. We can do this to prevent it.
Okay, Dana?
Probably failed in North Carolina.
What's that?
Yep.
North Carolina?
Yeah.
Okay. Red wolves? Okay. Yeah.
So I guess let me start by saying I think eventually they'll be here. But I also want to say this. One of the things you can do wrong, and this is the only pet peeve I tell my students in policy, quit saying, I'm going to educate the other side. It's really arrogant, and it makes it sound like they're just stupid is why they don't get it. What you should do is ask, why do you believe what you believe? And that's the approach Rick suggested too. And I guess one of the questions earlier was, don't start out by saying, we need wolves here. Everybody agrees. How do we get people to do that? The question is, why do I want wolves here? And it's like buy local or any of these other things, GMOs. There are lots of people, and they're all going to have different opinions. So the question is, how do we get the most people the most of what they want? And a lot of people want wolves in Colorado. I believe that's going to happen. And so one of the things you can do is start stepping all over everybody and just assume that it's the right thing to do. I'd question myself, you know, why do I want wolves? And why am I willing to do that at somebody else's expense? Or am I willing to? So ask them, and frequently people just like to be asked, to be honest. Right. And so I think that'd be the first thing is make sure you know why wolves should be here and why everybody else that doesn't agree should accept that. That would be
and the absolute wrong thing to do would be what? In your mind, just to, you know,
to just start, I guess if you had a referendum, for example, people in Denver would be voting it. This is the blue versus the red. They have the numbers, and then all of a sudden you're walking all over the red, which has the land base. Right. So you end up with these kind of conflicts, and so I guess just try to be. Rick said it a lot. Be careful to just think about other people, right. and I think we can introduce slowly and use good methods, and I think we have those, and I think that's the thing to do.
Okay, great. Hey guys, we're running up to time, so first and foremost, let's give our panel a big hand. Great work.